Hi, everybody. This is Karen. How are you guys today? Hey, have you always wanted to know how to sew? That's so good because I'm going to show you how today. Sewing is cool. It's kind of like gluing, but the problem with gluing is the glue does all the work. But when you sew, it's you, the needle, the thread, and the fabric all working together to create something beautiful. That's what we're about here today. I have my friend with me, Mr. Orca, and he's going to show you how to go through the fabric just like he goes through the waves. Thank you, Mr. Orca. We're going to practice 3 different stitches today, and let me show you the final product that you're going to be making. Right here. This is a helpful card that you can keep that will remind you how to do each of the stitches. The first one is the running stitch. The second one is the whip stitch. And the final one is the blanket stitch. So get ready, kids. Here's what you're going to need to do this. You need to have paper or cardboard right here. You need pen or a marker. I enjoy Sharpies because you can really see them on your fabric. You're going to need a needle and thread right here. And let's not forget about 3 small pieces of fabric. Here they are. 3 little pieces. Then scissors, gotta have them. And then you can either use glue or tape, whatever you have at home, to affix your fabric. That means to stick it onto the piece of paper. Okay, are we ready? Let's start with our first stitch, shall we? The running stitch. Now, we know that Mr. Orca doesn't run, but you know what he does do? He dives. And then he surfaces, and he dives, and then he surfaces, and on through the ocean waves. That's what we're going to be doing with our needle and thread. Let's try it now, kids. Needle and thread. Now mine, I have already threaded my needle. I did it ahead of time. But if you haven't done it before, this is where having really good eyes is going to be really helpful. So you find the little opening in your needle, just put the thread through and then tie a knot. That way, your thread doesn't slip out of the needle when you're trying to sew, and that's really important. So there it is. Then we're not done yet because on the other end, you need a knot. And your knot is to keep the thread from just flying right out of the fabric. Just like Mr. Orca, when he comes up out of the water, he doesn't just fly away. He's tethered to that water because that's where he wants to go. So he's going to dive right back down. Your knot assures you of success. All right. So here's my piece of fabric. There it is. There it is. And I'm going to start on the back. You'll notice that your fabric has a front and a back. The back is kind of plain and the front is very colorful. So starting on the back, you're going to go up. And now there's 2 ways to do this. Some people like to just every time pull the thread all the way through like that. Other people who want to make their line of stitches, really exact, and it's important to try to make them close together, not too long. They're going to go in and out, in and out, in and out, like this. So it's almost like if you could imagine Mr. Orca, if he left a path that you could see where he dove in and out and in and out, and you could see the pattern going across the water, that's what you're aiming toward right here. Pattern. So my needle's in, I pull it through, boom, and there I have my beginning of my running stitch, which you can definitely see better on here. Okay, Now I'm going to move on to stitch 2. This stitch is called the whip stitch. I like that word. That was a good song, The Whip, from back in the day. And so I'm going to tie my knot again. And there's my knot. And then for whip, I think it'll work better if you fold your piece of cloth over so that you have 2 layers. And then basically, let me show you how Mr. Orca would do it. If he were doing the whip stitch, he wouldn't be going in a straight line through the waves up and down. Instead, he'd be doing these cool spins where he goes out and then he spins around and then he comes back up and he goes out. And if you look at how this looks on here, you can see that it's straight where you can't see and it's sideways where you can see on the front. So that's the other thing about stitches and how they're kind of similar to what the orca does, because just like an orca is sometimes on the surface, but sometimes hidden when he dives, same with stitches. Sometimes you want your stitches to show because maybe they're fancy and they're along a little edge of your fabric, but other times you want them to be hidden. Like if you think about, if you look in your clothes, and you're probably all wearing clothes right now, you can check out that some stitches are meant to be hidden, and those are the ones that are underneath. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, so here's my thread, and now I'm going to do the whip stitch. And this one you definitely want to come all the way up each time, and then try to make the length of the stitch, like how high it is, the same every time, and then they'll look really good. So they should be the same distance apart and then the same height as well. And this is just for practice, so don't worry if it's not perfect or whatever. This could be your first time doing this. You'll get the hang of it over time. And believe me, sometimes my stitches don't look that great. That's why they invented sewing machines, right? But knowing how to do this and understanding how it works is the key to being able to create cool projects down the road. So eventually I'm going to end up with this kind of a whip stitch. And you can even see here that the way, I don't know if you can tell, but there's actually a piece of fabric folded over. So a lot of times a whip stitch is used, it's almost like a, like if you get injured and you get cut and you go into the doctor and he stitches you up, this is the kind of stitch that he would use often because it really can hold 2 separate things together, and that's really cool. All right, now for the third stitch, I'm going to actually show you in the chat the steps to it because it has three little steps that you can do. And I think that this picture is super helpful for checking it out. Hi, it's Karen again. I'm going to show you guys how to do the blanket stitch now, and I figured why not show you an actual blanket so you can see how it looks and maybe understand why someone would choose to use this. So here it is. You can see it goes all along the edge. And this is one of those stitches we talked before about how sometimes you want your stitches to show. The blanket stitch is an example of when you want it to show. That's why they use it at the edge of blankets. Well, why do they choose that stitch? Because this stitch is super strong and sturdy. It's basically, you're making almost a series of little, I don't know, almost like lassoing something as you go along. And so it's tight, it's not going to go anywhere, and it's a good way to put 2 pieces of fabric together that you want to have a nice little edge on. So I have a cool demo picture for you to look at that shows exactly how to do it. And when you look at this picture, you'll see there's basically 3 parts to the step, or 3 steps to the stitch. You, first of all, are creating a loop, and then the loop comes around, and then your needle goes down, and then you pull it tight, and boom, it's almost like a little knot where it's locked in place, and then you move on to the next one. So let's try one right here. The first one is a little tough because you haven't really started the pattern yet, but once you do one stitch, then it's easy after that. So you make a loop, you go through, and then you just pull it tight. And then you go on to the next one, and you make the loop, you come out, and then you basically wrap the thread around the needle and pull it out, and then boom, it locks in place. And there's a whole edge that runs right along the top. So it's like that. So it's almost like a little table where there's the 2 sides, and those are your stitches, and then along the top is the top of the table, and that's what kind of locks it in place before you move on to the next one. So it's like table, 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 down the line of the edge of your cloth. All right, so once you've completed your 3 samples, then you need to get your glue or your tape, and make sure you leave enough room to do your writing. You can write on the fabric, or you could write above the fabric, depending on what size it is. Make a nice heading of stitches, and then just go ahead. I wrote right on the fabric because that was easier for me and I had more room. And then you're going to either tape them or glue them to your card. And that way, when we meet later on to do the fish pouch, you'll be ready to go. And when I say, okay, for this part, we're going to do a running stitch or a blanket stitch or a whip stitch, you'll go, I know what that is. I'm going to refer to my handy chart, and you'll be able to create an awesome art project. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.